morning, everybody. My name's Kim Hargrave, and I'm the Education Director at the Denison Pequotsepos Nature Center. And I'm really excited today to be talking about something a little bit different than we normally do. Today, we're going to be talking all about watersheds. And this might be a sign that you see, you're driving around and you see a sign that says, entering the 8-Mile River Watershed, entering the Chesapeake Bay Watershed if you're heading down on vacation towards Maryland. And you may not realize exactly what a watershed is and why it's so important that we actually put signs up announcing them. So I have a cool thing to demonstrate here that's going to help explain what a watershed is. And this is called the Enviroscape model, and so we'll be using this as well. The first thing I'm going to do, though, is going to give you that definition of what a watershed is. A watershed is an area of land, so we might take this, that drains into a specific body of water. And so in this case, let's pretend this is named Nature Center Land, and this is Nature Center Lake. And all the water that falls on this drains into Nature Center Lake. And so our watershed is all of this property right here. Now, here at the Nature Center, our watershed is the Pequotsepos Brook. So think about the name of our nature center, the Pequotsepos Nature Center. And that's because the water that falls here drains into Pequotsepos Brook.
And Rosie's excited.
And Rosie loves our watersheds. Watersheds are so important that even our pigeons care about them a lot. So this is Rosie, everybody. She'll be helping us out, I'm sure, today, especially as I start sprinkling water around and things like that. So the Nature Center is in the Pequotsepos Brook. Now, if you visit our other campus, you walk from here and you go over the hill onto our Coogan Farm property, you actually switch watersheds. You end up in the Mystic River watershed. And that's one of the things that makes the Nature Center so important. The land that we protect together with the Denisons and the Avallonia Land Conservancy actually protects land in two different watersheds, the Mystic River watershed and the Pequotsepos Brook watershed. Now, watersheds can get bigger. So a small watershed, like the Pequotsepos Brook, actually is part of a larger watershed. So all the water that runs from our brook runs into Pequotsepos Cove, which then goes out into Fisher's Island Sound, which is right next to Long Island Sound right there. So if you care about what's going on in the Sound, you care about what's going on in the entire watershed. Same thing happens with our other watersheds. One of the watersheds we do a lot of programming in, we love to visit, is the 8-Mile River watershed. And that 8-Mile River watershed actually drains into the Connecticut River and from there into Long Island Sound. When we talk about the watershed, we're not just talking about the streams and the brooks, but we're talking about all the land that's part of it. So you think about all the things that are on land, whether it's building, houses, roads, all of those things together make up our watershed. All right, I want to show you one quick map right here. It's a tricky map. I should have mentioned this to Cassandra before I did this to her. But this map here is a map of Connecticut. And all those little black lines, instead of being roads, are actually all the little streams and the big rivers that flow through our state. So think about all these little creeks and brooks that are running through our state. It actually looks like a little highway map.
It does.
Right. And all of these are parts of different watersheds. But notice, almost all of them eventually land right here in Long Island Sound. All right, so the majority of Connecticut is part of the Long Island Sound watershed. And if you know the Connecticut River flows up through the middle of the state, splits Massachusetts in half, goes through Vermont and New Hampshire, and goes up to its headwaters in Canada. So the Long Island watershed is absolutely huge, going all the way up to Canada.
And it seems like you just blew Jessica Tomlin's mind, because she said, what? I think she's pretty amazed.
So if you think about that, things that happen in Vermont, New Hampshire, and even in Canada can affect the health of Long Island Sound and the Connecticut River where we are. So let's talk a little bit more about the watershed itself using this model right here. Now, this is a fun model to use. Again, I said it's called the Enviroscape model.
This is one of my favorites.
It's highly entertaining, and it kind of shows all the different things that can be on a watershed and all the different ways that you and I use the land that can affect the water down here. Because a lot of times when we think about, Long Island Sound and think about pollution in the Sound, we really are thinking, a boater has a leaky oil tank, or, a big factory ship is causing problems. We're not actually thinking about what's happening way up here affecting what's down this way. So let's first think about all the things that are on our watershed. We have a lot of roads in our watersheds right around here. And to get over all those little streams, we have bridges. And sometimes we don't notice the bridges because they're actually big culverts that go under the road, those big giant pipes. So we're just traveling along and we may not even notice them. And then we have our bigger bridges like the Gold Star Bridge or the bridge that goes over the Connecticut River. We see those big bridges. All right, so we're going to put all of our bridges on there. And then we have other things that are on our watershed. So we're going to use a little liberty here, but, things like farms. All right, so some of our rural areas here in Connecticut, we have farms, we have farmhouses, and we have barns out there. We do have some manufacturing that happens in Connecticut, so we might have some factories right over here. And then we have some school buildings. This is a very severe looking school building, but we'll put that right down over here in our neighborhood. We have houses that come in all different shapes and sizes. All right, so we have all different types of things happening in our areas. We also have hills. We have forested areas, things like that.
Ooh, Kim, we have a question from Jessica who just tuned in and missed the very beginning. She would like to know if you can explain what a watershed is again, because you're doing a great job by showing all of these things that are related.
So remember, the definition of a watershed is an area of land that drains into a specific body of water. So that means, like I said before, if we call this the Nature Center watershed, it would drain into Nature Center Lake or Nature Center River right down here. So that area of land is named after the body of water that it drains into. So you might think of the Connecticut River watershed, all the land that drains into the Connecticut River. So it's all the water that goes through the streams, but it's also the water that runs off the roads and off of our yards and even travels under the ground. So groundwater is part of the watershed. So all these things are really important to remember. All right, so let's think about what we end up putting on our watershed. All right, so a lot of people at this time of year are looking at their lawns and they're thinking, ooh, our grass needs a little bit of help in their lawn. And so they're putting on a little bit of fertilizer. And if you do that, if you make that choice, you need to make sure that you're providing just the amount that your grass needs, because any extra fertilizer you put on, your grass can't take up. Grass can't overeat the way you and I can, right? And so any that's left over actually gets washed away in the water. So this guy right here, he wants really green grass, and he thinks if he puts a little bit of fertilizer on it, well, that's okay. But if I put extra on, it's even better. So I'm going to put a bunch of fertilizer on his grass. Put a bunch of fertilizer on it.
Oh, we can see it starting to travel.
And the other problem that he's having is he's got a bunch of bugs, in his grass. He's got a bunch of anthills. And hi, Rosie. And he's not too happy about those ants. Rosie would help us out with those ants, though. So
she would love it.
Keep that in mind. Lots of animals help us out with these things. And so he's also going to stick some ant killer on that. And, this guy, he's got such green grass right now. This guy got a little jealous, so he's going to stick some fertilizer on there too. All right. But he doesn't really want to do poison. So he's being good about that. All right. So we've got this going on right over here. And, right now you're like, okay, well, it hasn't really gone too far. Nothing I'm too worried about. All right. But we also have a factory over here. This factory makes red candy, and they use a lot of red dye when they make their red candy. All right. So our red candy factory ended up with some extra dye. So they're just going to have that right up there. So it's the red candy factory. All right. And so in order to get rid of any waste, they just let that go down into the water. And let's see what happens now when it actually rains, because this is how water travels. All right. So I'm going to let it rain right here. You can see how the water starts to travel down.
It's on the move. Look at those colors starting to run.
All right. So I haven't put any water down in the Nature Center's lake down here. I'm watering just up at the top of the hill right here. And look at how that water is traveling down. All right. And if you look in our lake right now, you see pink coming down. Well, we all know where that pink is coming from. That pink is coming from the pink candy factory or the red candy factory right up here. When we can tell exactly where a source of pollution is coming from, we call that point source pollution. And the nice thing about point source pollution, if there's a nice thing about pollution, is that we can go right back to the pink factory and say, hey, can you guys help to get rid of that pink so it's not going in to our water source? Because not only are you contaminating the stream up here, you're contaminating our beach where we all like to swim, where there's otters and beavers and all sorts of wildlife down here. Now, that is one part to control. But the other part is this guy. If you looked, there was a lot of green coming down in the water there, green and blue. And I can't tell whether it came from this house or this house. And when I can't tell, I call that non-point source pollution. So point, we know exactly where it comes from. Non-point source is things like fertilizers that's coming from a lot of different sources. And that's something that everybody as a community can work together to try to reduce. If we all use less fertilizer, that means less fertilizer ends up in our water. And when we get a lot of fertilizer in our water, it can cause all sorts of imbalances in it with different types of plant growth. Animals and fish can die. It's just kind of a really bad thing that we could do a whole nother program on. So we don't want all that fertilizer to end up down here. All right, so there's a few other things that can happen too. So let's say we have an area that we need to cut down a few trees in. And so what'll happen is, you know, somebody could cut down a few trees, but if they cut them down on a steep slope like this, it loosens up all of the soil. There's my soil. And so the soil that was, you know, all nice and embedded and stuck in with the roots from the trees can get very loose. All right. And that also can run down into our water. So if you've ever flown across the country, you might have seen sometimes when you're looking down from the airplane, you see streams and things like that that are brown. A lot of times floodwaters are brown. I was looking at some very sad pictures this morning out in parts of our country that are experiencing flooding right now. And you see that the water is brown, and that's because all the soil is being washed away with those floodwaters. And in that case, it's hard to prevent. But around a hillside, there are things that we can do. Sometimes you see those hay bales, and those hay bales around the side of a road are actually to block the soil from eroding away, and it's to block pollution from coming as well. A couple other things that can happen. We all drive cars, all right? So let's say we have our car and it's parked in the parking lot because we work at the pink factory right here. And unfortunately, our car has a little bit of an oil leak. So you may not think it's too bad because you just get a few drops, all right, that are out of your car. And, you know, this car isn't too great either. It's driving down the road and it's got an oil leak. Well, what do you think happens to that oil? All right, let's think about it. What happens is that oil will eventually travel down into the stream.
Oh, we can see
well.
it. So we can see that soil that was coming out, and now the oil that's coming
the oil
out.
Slicks right there.
Oh, went right under our bridge into the waterways.
Yep, and you can actually see the little spots of oil. And that was just a couple drops. All right, and this is what actually happens in real life. So it's important if we can keep our cars fixed so that they're not leaking oil and things like that as well. Another thing is, let's say you live really close to a small stream and you really like the stream and you want to have some gardens and things like that. It's very important that you don't have your soil right up to the edge. Never have bare soil. Think about nature. When you're out walking, very rarely do you see bare soil in nature. It's almost man-made. And that's because, again, loose soil will cause erosion. All of this will go right into the water right here. So what farmers try to do is they try to protect the area where water meets soil. And we can do that at our houses too. If you live near a river or near a stream, you want to make sure that you have plants right there. Because if you put plants, I've got really cool blue sponges here to represent plants. All right.
Those are the greatest plants I've ever seen.
These are awesome blue flowers. And what'll happen then is the soil, all right, will just get filtered down by these plants, and it won't end up in the water.
Right. You can see a lot less made it through those sponges than in the other areas that didn't have our plants. So
we call that a riparian zone, and it's really, really important to always have, areas of plants and trees right up next to the banks of the water, and that'll prevent a lot of erosion. Now, one other thing that I wanted to talk about is sometimes when you're driving down the highway, you'll see a sign that says watershed, low salt area. And this is important in the wintertime. And that tells you that they're not putting very much salt or sand on the roads there because they don't want that salt and that sand to end up in the water. And one of the things that we notice here at the Nature Center is because when they put a lot of sand and salt on the road like this in the wintertime, all right, that sand, when it rains and the snow melts, goes right down into our storm drains and ends up getting into our ponds. I mean, it might be just thinking, well, if there's not salt, it's just sand, it's not a big deal. But over time, that can actually change the bottoms of our streams. Our streams are getting a lot more sand in them, and now so the animals that used to be used to a muddy bottom are now looking at a sandy bottom. Also, if there's a lot of salt in it, think about animals like frogs. They don't really like salty water. They need fresh water. So it's really important to keep that water clear. And so when you see them out cleaning up the roads in the springtime, that is why they're trying to get up that sand they put down to protect us when we were driving in the winter. But it is important that the street sweepers then go out, even on our back roads, and pick up all that sand so it's not getting in to our water here. So the nice thing is, when you know about how a watershed works, there's a lot of things that we can do to protect it. We can be smart if we're putting anything on our yard, maybe making the choice not to put fertilizers and things like that on our yard. We can approach companies that if we know that they have a pollution problem with a certain thing, that they can get help in order to fix that. We know that we can put areas, leave plants near water spots. We can be careful about where we cut down plants. If we cut down those plants, we replace them with things. One other thing that's really important is if you have pets and like dogs and things like that, that you clean up after them, especially if you're hiking near a water source, because the other thing that can happen is the dog waste and things like that can get into our water as well. With farmers, a lot of farmers have to make sure that they put, if they have cows and things like that, they'll make sure they put a fence around their pasture so the cow can't go directly into the water, and then it doesn't go to the bathroom in the water and we don't end up with manure in there. So again, on a big scale, it might be farms, but on a small scale, it can be us with our own pets. So much that we can do to protect our watersheds here and around Connecticut. I highly encourage you to visit some of our local watersheds. They have just amazing areas that are protected. If you live on a watershed, I happen to live on a watershed out in Salem, and it's really, really important to make sure that we're taking good care of our property and things like that. And the watershed that I live on is actually supplying drinking water for residents in New London. And so I want to make sure that what I do on my watershed is safe so that it doesn't affect any of the drinking water in other parts of the town. Now, actually, everybody lives on some type of watershed, whether you live in downtown New London or whether you live out in the country here in Stonington, you are on a watershed. And it's kind of fun to look it up. You can go on to Connecticut websites, the deep websites. You can kind of figure out where you live, what watershed you live on, what are some of the names of the streams and the brooks around. Really fun thing to investigate. You learn a lot about the history of your land.
Now we have a great question from Emma, who has actually asked a couple questions about erosion. So she would like to know, can erosion happen when the river moves down into a pond like dirt? So I think she chimed in about erosion earlier when the trees came down.
Yep.
So is there a way or things that we recommend to help from creating these erosion problems?
So the first thing is we think hard about where we cut down our plants. Steep slopes are always a problem when we cut down trees and things like that, causes more erosion. If you think about on a large scale out west, when they have fires and then they get mudslides because of the rain that hits it. On our small scale, it can be, if you pull out a plant and you have a big area of dirt, you want to make sure you put like loose hay on it. So a lot of times we see sides, they seed it, but while they're waiting for those seeds to sprout and the roots to spread to hold the soil in place, they put hay over it. And that's why if they're putting the hay there, it's to hold the seeds and hold the soil in place. So that's a great way to do it. Just make sure whatever hay you get should be straw. You don't want the seeds from the hay because otherwise
then you have other things that are growing. And actually hay is a great straw is a great thing to use, and I know that we use that here at the nature center to help with erosion because sometimes things can get a little muddy on the hill right outside.
Yep.
So you might notice that is what we use here, and it works well because we're very thoughtful about what we put down because we have the duck pond so close.
Yep.
So it's important, again, knowing where it all comes together, that, mulch and other things are great, but can end up in unintended places. We had a couple other questions. I'm just going to...
One of the other things while we're looking for those questions that we do here at the Nature Center is we put something called water bars in. And the word water bar is basically a glorified log that we put just in the right spot so that the water will actually veer in the direction that we want it to go so that it'll avoid filling in our pond, things like that. So
now Mal Smith had a question, and I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce it properly. The riparian, is that just an area of plants?
So it's usually an area of plants. It can be trees, it can be shrubs, grasses, and it's always an area where land meets water. That's the riparian zone.
And so we had the sponges here, and that was to represent plantings that were done.
Yep.
Okay.
And so, but technically this green area would all be a riparian zone as well.
All right. We have Jessica's household is saying hello to Rosie, who is hanging out on the table over there.
She has some extra food out and about today.
Yes, she is checking things out. So Jessica does have a question from Avery, who's age 8. If ducks on the pond, will they get hurt from the dirty water?
So they can actually get hurt from the dirty water. And so it's that's why it's so important that what we do up here doesn't allow pollution to get down into the water because they can eat food that might have pollutants or plants that might have pollutants in them, and it can build up in their system.
Now, hopefully I'm not going to cause any craziness, but I know we often get a question from dog owners because we always encourage people to pick up after their dogs, but they say, well, isn't it natural? Why can't I just leave it on the trails?
The reason why you can't leave it on the trails is because if a lot of people walk their dogs there, you end up with an unnatural amount because obviously you're right. Like a coyote, we don't clean up the coyote scat or the fox scat or the raccoon scat or anything like that. And it's just that you get an unnatural amount in one spot.
And then that can probably cause things like algal blooms or other things.
It actually causes too much fertilizer in a particular area. If you look at my yard, you might think we put fertilizer in one area, but it's really where our dogs go to the bathroom.
All right, great. So does anyone have any other questions before we tune out for the day? Rosie is up in the corner. If you hear her scratching, she has determined that corner is one of her favorites. And we have a feeling that at some point she might end up building a nest up there, even though she has lots of other areas to hang out. Kim is laughing because Rosie is such a big character. So everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today. Hopefully you had some fun with us and watersheds and Rosie causing more chaos in the background. It's always great to tune in and to learn something new. So again, thanks for tuning in and learning about watersheds. We're going to be coming to you next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 10 a.m. So stay tuned. We hope to see you then.